Welcome, everybody, to the Train of Thought podcast, and today we're going to be talking about episode 2 of Survivor Season 40, Winners at War. Sitting here with my girlfriend, Emma, and the first point that I definitely wanted to talk about was something I was concerned about going in, which was how they were going to start putting the episodes together, given that now they're obviously rolling with 1 hour episodes the rest of the way for the most part, after being a 2 hour episode in the first one, and how they're going to juggle having Edge of Extinction, as well as challenges, as well as Tribal Council, as well as all of the in-between stuff that people are going to want to see amongst their favorite contestants. And I feel like they did a pretty good job of that in this episode.
I mean, it felt like a normal episode to me. Nothing weird or anything like that, except for the moment leading up to Tribal, I feel like was a lot shorter than usual.
Right, and that's one of the concerns with having Edge, and one of the reasons why people don't love it a lot of the time is because it does take away from the actual interaction of people on the beach in substitute of people just hanging out on an island that are just waiting around. There's not a whole lot going on. Now, we did see more action on Edge than you typically do, just because of the nature of this season and some of the things that are happening there. But we do begin on Edge of Extinction, and we're there for, I don't know, like 10 seconds, 15. We're not there for very long, or at least not very far into the episode is when we start there. And then they go to essentially an idol hunt on both sides of the beach, with Denise and Kim both finding an idol, but it's a special kind where they each have like one half. Yes, where they have to use both halves in order for it to be effective. And in this case, Ben is with Denise.
Ben helps Denise find it.
Correct. And it's interesting because he makes the point that that's one of the ways he feels like he can bond with people, is using teaching idol hunting as a way to bond with people. If, you know, just regular social interaction wasn't something he was good at, he knows he's good at idol hunting, and teaching Denise is one of the ways he tries to bond with her.
Yeah, which it was helpful. I mean, he was super helpful, and she was the one to find it. And the cool thing, too, is he wasn't even trying to convince her to give him the second half. Mm-hmm. He was just like, oh, cool, like, you can give it to a third person, and now we have 3 people, and then we can expand and expand. Like, he was actually playing the game pretty smart in that moment. He
wanted to make sure that they used it in a way that was going to help them socially. And I guess part of the whole, oh, you don't have to give it to me thing lends to the he's trying to be friends with people and be social. Because if he's immediately like, oh, you have to give it to me, then what really was the point of him being there, other than just to, you know, have the other half, if that was the case, or just have the information? It doesn't come across as friendly if he's immediately like, oh, you have to give me the other half. So
which is what Adam does.
Right. So Denise and Adam have been paired up pretty much since the beginning, almost out of necessity. I don't honestly think they were all that close until the rest of the tribe tried to make it seem like they were that close.
Yeah.
So Denise goes and talks with Adam and just like, hey, I found this idol. It's 2 halves. Who should I give it to? And they start to have a conversation back and forth. Adam is obviously thinking, give it to me. That's the intelligent thing to do. Because
she recommends Parvati, and he's like, what? No, not her.
Right.
You should give it to me, and then I'll keep it safe. And immediately cuts to him interviewing, and he's like, haha, I got the second half of the idol. I have it now. Like, Denise did it out of an act of, like, friendship. He definitely was more strategic about it.
I mean, I don't know. I felt like it was more about him just wanting to make sure that nobody else knew. I didn't really think it was facetious and like, oh, I need this power, I need this idol. Because he was upset already that Ben knew, partially because he thinks Ben is a bit of a wild card. But just in general, I think he's just concerned about people knowing about it in general and that creating a target around them. But specifically mentioning Parvati as someone to give the other half to, I literally wrote down in my notes, it says, is Denise dumb? Because that makes literally no sense.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why, like, I really don't know why she said that. We both kind of looked at each other. Like,
yeah, that was,
all right.
I'm honestly surprised they even kept it in the show, because from like a strategic standpoint, it just makes her look awful, which maybe is why they kept it. But then, as I said, we get to the other side, and Kim also finds an idol on the other beach for Red, and she shares it with Sophie, and that appears to also be a bad decision, because immediately they cut to an interview with Sophie, and she says, it makes no sense. We don't really have any kind of relationship. I'm kind of with the group that's trying to get her out, or is kind of against her when she was left out on the first vote and felt on the outside. So to this point, it definitely seems like there are people that are not fully understanding how to properly use these idols.
Yeah.
And then at that point, we go back to Edge for the second time in the first like 20 minutes of the episode, where Natalie gets this safety without power advantage to sell for a token, which came as a result of, I guess, a clue, you could phrase it that way, on
There
Edge.
was a clue. She found it coincidentally.
Right.
They didn't solve the riddle.
Yeah, there was some kind of riddle or word puzzle or something that was near the mast at Edge, and her and Amber were both looking, and they hiked around everywhere, and all they had to do was look at the water well because the first letter in each word down the left side spelled out water well, and she finds this safety without power advantage, which has been in the game before, but I don't think has ever been used. I could be wrong, but I don't think anybody... It was definitely in Island of the Idols. I don't know if it was there before that, but I don't think anyone's ever used it. Do you remember?
I don't remember them using it, but I don't think it was like a choice. I think it was like, hey, send this to somebody on the other side. They don't go to tribal, and they don't know what happens. And so everybody comes back, but they're safe.
It was somebody's lesson.
I don't know.
And I think it was a guy, and their reasoning for it was they didn't want it because if they used it and dipped out of tribal, they felt like that would make them a target because they weren't helping their alliance going into it, and they were just leaving. They were being selfish, and so they didn't. I don't remember who it was, but essentially that's what it is you go to tribal, but before the vote, you show your advantage, and you leave, and you don't even vote, and you also obviously don't have a vote, so that's the safety part without having the power of your actual vote. So after she gets this advantage, it's a similar situation to when Sandra received an idol. The thinking for Natalie was, I want to make sure I give it to someone that's going to use it because I want the token, but also for Natalie, obviously she wants to help out Jeremy. She sells it to Jeremy, and he takes it, which leads us to the Tony on a ladder incident.
It wasn't a great ladder, but it did the job, so...
It was an awful ladder.
But it did the job. They got
Barely.
fruit, but it did the job.
Like 3 rungs broke out of the 7. So he barely made it up. I feel like this is bad.
By the way...
I feel like this is really bad.
By the way, it was Janet's visit. It was Janet. She was the one that was like, I could take it, but then I have a bigger target, but then I'm not a target this week. So Tony's gameplay this season is to be as friendly and as normal, I would say, as possible.
As non-Tony-like as possible.
Yeah, I was going to say non-sketchy, but that just was weird. But, like, he wants to be normal. So he's like, he was like, I have an itch to, like, idol hunt and go crazy and be insane. But instead, I'm giving myself tasks around camp so that I'm in the center of camp. I can be seen at all times. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows where I am. So he builds a ladder. This is prefaced with Yule creating a hook out of rope to get breadfruit, which I don't even know.
No idea what breadfruit is.
I thought he said grapefruit for the longest time. So when he was like, he like clearly said breadfruit.
It was in the subtitles. Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And somebody said it was a 150-pound ladder. I mean, like,
it was made out of bamboo, so I highly doubt it was 150 pounds.
Well, like, Kim was helping carry it.
It seemed as though it was more bulky than it was heavy.
Yeah, it was just awkward. And, of course, Tony's climbing up here. Now, granted, the rungs on the ladder are 3/4 of Tony's height. Mm-hmm. So he's not climbing the ladder. He's literally, like...
He's scaling the ladder.
The ladder, like, lunging up it, has his knee in his ear, trying to get up. But it works. I mean, he gets fruit down, no problem. And it was kind of everybody around camp was watching and helping and stuff. But that led us into Sarah and Tony's secret relationship.
Cops are us. I really quickly want to go back to what you're talking about how Tony was kind of lowering his threat level by acting as non-Tony-like as possible. I had assumed that he would be an issue for people regardless. Mm-hmm. Like, not even if he acted the way that he is now. To be fair, they've only gone to one tribal. But even him acting the way that he is now, I assumed that just because of his reputation and not being trustworthy at all in his season, the one that he won, I felt like he still would have been a threat regardless. But it does seem like just amongst all these winners,
he's like
acting acting as normal as he knows how to act, they don't seem threatened by him, to the point where, as you said, him and Sarah are even working together, which they did in their first season. Obviously, Game Changers, he was out so quickly, but they did in his first season, and Sarah got completely burned.
Yeah. Who was the one that said it makes it hard to believe that back home Tony is the one that enforces the
Tyson,
law?
I think.
Yeah.
I think Tyson made the point when he's climbing up the ladder, Tyson's voice is in the background, like, yeah, believe it or not, this is a guy that's enforcing the law back home.
Yeah. Tyson is skeptical to say the least. More so about how Tony survived life long enough to make it onto Survivor for three times
True.
now. He brought up that they have to sign waivers, which I'm sure answered a lot of questions for people.
I assumed, yeah.
He was like, yeah, I know we signed waivers, but I don't think there was a ladder clause.
Yeah.
So, we'll see. But yeah, so then Sarah's like, yeah, I have to keep my distance from Tony, and they're walking on the beach. And she's talking, Tony's like, I mean, if they think we're together, why don't we just be together so that there's not conspiracies?
She was even making the point that they had to actively stay apart so people didn't know they were together. It was almost like they were trying to make it seem like they weren't a pair in public because people were assuming they were, which again is wild to me.
Yeah, so they reinstated Cops R Us. But Sarah made the point that part of Cops R Us voted out this part of Cops R Us. So maybe she has a vendetta out still.
And he even makes the comment that they're good, and he swears on his badge, which is something he did when he won the season and voted Sarah out after he swore on his badge that he wouldn't vote her out. Yeah. So do you think it's like a keeping enemies closer type thing, or you think Sarah's actually saying this is going to be a 2? Because she seemed genuine. She seemed like she actually wanted to work with Tony and thought it was going to work. And I don't know if she's just, she's so much more confident in herself now having won Game Changers, or if she's just enemies closer type thing.
I think it's an enemies closer type thing. I think it's more so like, I'm going to quote unquote work with you, but more so I just don't want to be a target in your realm.
Right.
So I'm just going to say everything you want to hear, but I'm going to play my own game and forget that you're...
she at least knows... Tony seems 100% down to work with her, but she at least, even if she's not as down to work together as he is, she at least knows what he's thinking. Yeah. Assuming he's telling the truth. That's the whole enemies closer thing, is she has at least a little bit more information on how much of a wild card he can be. But again, lines haven't been drawn as clearly over there because they've only been to one tribal. But, yeah. Which leads us into the challenge. And the big thing going into the challenge is the fact that Rob is then going to find out. He kind of assumed, after getting a fire token, that Amber was voted out. He speculated that maybe it was Sandra, which was, given conversations we've had.
Well, that's where it got weird. He was like, it might have been Sandra. No. That's what, he didn't speculate that Sandra got her out. He said it was either Amber or Sandra that sent him the token. Yeah. Because him and Sandra had built a relationship after spending 36 days on an island together.
Meanwhile, Sandra's fuming, apparently, according to her, on the other island and scheming to get his wife out. They are on completely separate pages. Yeah. Now, maybe it was just one of those things where he was hoping that was the case because he obviously didn't want his wife to have been voted out.
I don't know.
But he seemed like he really thought that they were cool.
Rob's not one to vocalize things that he's hoping for. He's one to vocalize things that he is confident in.
That's fair.
So I don't think he's just like, oh, I really hope it was Sandra and she's not mad at me.
Right.
I think it's something.
Which, once we get to the challenge, he finds out that, yes, it is actually the fact that his wife was voted out. Which, as we said, leads us into the actual challenge when Rob shows up and finds out that, in fact, Amber was voted out. And a lot of the camera attention and obviously the tribe member attention was on Rob, seeing how he was going to react. Probst asked him the question, hey, by the way, your wife's voted out, in case you hadn't noticed. And I honestly felt like his reaction in that moment, not necessarily in the challenge, but in that pre-challenge moment, showed a lot of what makes him so great, because he clearly was fuming. You could see it in his face. He wanted to say a lot of things in that moment, but he was just like, hey, it's the game, it's whatever, we're moving on. And a less experienced and a worse player in that moment would have cried or would have gotten emotional and yelled or just would have said words in general. He realized that was a moment in which him opening his mouth was going to lead to very few positive things.
Yep.
And so he just composed himself and was like, yeah, it's the game, moving on. And I thought that was symbolic of one of the things that makes him so great, is his ability to control those things.
Yeah, no, he definitely, one thing we talked about in this episode was the camera work. I personally thought it was not that good. I thought
the episode as a whole.
Yeah, in the episode as a whole. And this moment stuck out to me especially because you could tell that they were trying to cut into his face, but like he's in the back row of a group setting. So you can't really see him. So they have Sophie's eyeball and somebody else's ear, and then Rob's face zoomed in super close. But I mean, you could definitely tell he had a lot of thoughts going on the entire challenge. Right. He was not there mentally at all.
See, I don't know. I don't necessarily, he's typically good in challenges and in puzzles. And then this one, he happened to perform poorly in the same challenge in which he found out his wife got voted out. But I think it's possible that he just had a bad challenge. I feel like he had a good strategy, and in terms of separating the pieces and understanding where they went. Who was he working with? Do you remember who he was doing the puzzle with?
Sophie.
It was Sophie? You sure?
Wait, are they on the same tribe?
It was Denise, wasn't it? It was Denise.
Oh, Sophie was on the winning tribes puzzle. That's why I keep seeing her with a puzzle.
Yeah, so it was Denise. I almost felt like Denise was doing nothing.
Yeah, no, he kept saying, like, no, blue is here, purple's here, and Denise is putting, like, purple and blue and purple.
Like, he's trying to lead it, which is what he does in these challenges.
Who separates puzzle pieces in Survivor? Nobody.
I guess he felt like, because you made the comment, we're watching it, they cut to Tony and he said something about, oh, make them panic, and they all start yelling, and I look at you and I'm like, okay, this means that Rob's team is going to win, because that's like one of those comments that they leave in and they're like, okay, the other team starts coming back. And you made the point that it wasn't going to take long for them to come back because the other team had already done the first part of the puzzle, and Rob just looks at it and they had that first part done really, really quickly.
Yeah. The problem is the middle chest had 2 sections in it.
Right.
So they had to get 2 sections done, and that's when he wanted to separate. But I'm like, nobody separates puzzle pieces in Survivor. You just match them up and you fix them where they go.
Right.
And I think that's what hurt him is like the other team was like, hey, let's strategize on the way, and he was like, no, let's get a strategy together. Let's figure it out, and then we'll start piecing it together. But a puzzle itself, actively working on it, takes strategy enough.
Right.
So doubling up on your strategy is hindering in this sense. So and he even admits, he was like, I was second guessing myself and I don't do that in challenges, let alone in puzzles. And they were like, yeah, there were actually like a lot of us were speaking up when we shouldn't have. And it like the teamwork there just wasn't there in this challenge.
Right. I'm going to speak for myself. If I'm going to, like, hypothetically, if I'm behind Rob and he's doing a puzzle, I'm not saying a word. Like, I'm going to go ahead and assume that he knows how to do this puzzle. Because, like, Ben was speaking up. It's like, Ben, I get it. Like, you were really good in challenges at the end of your season. I'm going to defer to Rob here. Even if you think you could say something that would help, it's probably just going to confuse him.
I'll probably speak to myself. Cause
but he was yelling. Like, he said his name. He was like, Rob, do this.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm going to slightly go the other way on the challenge performance. I wouldn't be surprised if you just take Denise out of that equation if he performs better. I felt like he got scrambled because he was trying to lead her and himself. And in terms of like the way he wanted the puzzle to go together, and she was moving stuff maybe that he didn't want it to be there. He didn't perform well regardless. I don't want to defend him too much, but I felt like he didn't do as badly as it seemed. I felt like maybe just the methods didn't match up.
They got annihilated.
Yeah, they got destroyed.
Yeah.
To be fair, they were neck and neck, and then they screwed up the like the obstacle portion where the other team just ran through it, and they were trying to clear it, and they didn't get their cart put together enough. But regardless, they end up losing, which means that this tribe will once again be voting someone out. It wasn't back-to-back, but they were the first group, and then now they're the third group because Amber was the second voted out.
So red wins.
Correct.
Blues go into tribal.
Correct. And going into it, there were a couple of names that were thrown out. Rob is concerned specifically about Ben, which is a viewpoint that Adam shares.
As a wild card.
Correct. Everybody seems to come together on the fact that Ben is a bit of a wild card. But there aren't necessarily like lines established. They're just talking.
As much of a hot mess as Ben was in the first episode, he was just as much, if not more, at certain points of a hot mess in this episode. I don't know why I didn't notice it before, but Ben is extremely socially awkward in the sense of he's still living in his Survivor fandom.
He was Heroes, Hustlers, Healers, right?
Yeah, because
he was a
hero.
That was like one of his main ways to connect with people was mentioning his military background and talking about that with people and being vulnerable about that. I don't know if he has as many people to connect with. I mean, Jeremy, I guess, Jeremy's a firefighter. Like, he has people that he can connect with, but it just doesn't seem to be working as well.
Well, yeah, he's just very excited.
He seems overwhelmed by the people he's around more than anybody else.
He's super excited to be alive right now and on that island, and he's like, he literally is living his best life. Like, I know we talk about like, oh, Rob loves the game, he loves playing. No, Ben is living. He's starstruck. He's living his best life. He's living his dream right now.
Which we can jump. I mean, we can come back to this part before Tribal, but just sticking with the Ben thing, going forward to Tribal was not one of his better moments either.
No, he protected himself, but he just talked to talk. I think like
he was really, really excited to point out the fact that he was part of a conversation that he shouldn't have been a part of. Because he was like, as soon as it came up, he was like, hey, by the way, Danni said something to me she shouldn't have, but he didn't have anywhere he was going. He just really wanted to share with these people that he admires, like being starstruck, hey, I was a part of this conversation.
I'm doing cool things too,
right,
guys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But going back to pre-tribal, again, Ben's name is thrown out a little bit, but it's not necessarily established. And then all of a sudden, Danni starts to freak out, primarily because she feels like Parvati specifically is someone that she's close with, and Parvati is not talking to her. That's her entire reasoning for feeling left out, is people are having conversations without her, which I can understand why that would make you paranoid, but the way that she goes about trying to diffuse the situation and figure out what's going on, she does every single thing wrong.
She first goes to Ethan and Ben and is talking primarily to Ethan, because really Ben just wants to be there. He doesn't really care to be included as long as he's involved, if that makes sense. Okay. So she's primarily talking to Ethan, and she's like, hey, I know I'm on the chopping block. Let me plead my case. And he's like, all right, what do you mean? And she was like, well, Rob came to me and said he wanted to do an old school, new school thing. And Ethan immediately goes, hey, you know Ben's not old school, right? And she starts stumbling over her words. Oh, yeah. And it awkwardly cuts again, because the producing of this episode was just super weird, and the editing and everything, to me personally. It just cuts. Nothing really comes of it. Now she's talking to Rob. Side note, Rob has made one of those games with the ring and the hook where you have a rope and you swing it and it hooks on. Doesn't leave the spot for however long they're
Every
there.
conversation he has pre-tribal is at that spot.
Yep, he's holding the ring as far back as it goes.
Right.
Talking to people, and then they walk away and he throws it and tries to
Which
hook
either
it.
Means he's there forever, or all these conversations happen within a 20-minute period.
Yeah. I can see him being there forever.
Right.
I can
What
see
else
him
is he
just
doing?
playing a game.
Right.
Anyways, so Danni then goes to Rob. It cuts to Danni with Rob. Hey, so what do you think about getting Parvati out? Again, kind of with Denise wanting to give the idol to Parvati.
She starts with, hey, I feel like I'm on the outs. He's like, I don't think that's the case at all. Which, I mean, I can understand her being distrustful of Rob, but at the same time, in that moment, why would your next comment be, okay, well, I think we should get out Parvati, the person you talk to literally every day and have been the closest with since we first got here?
Yeah.
Makes absolutely zero sense.
So Rob, being the player he is like, all right, I'm in. Yeah, let's get Parv out. Go straight
he
to Parvati.
He literally said, because he knows, he's like, she's probably not going to be on the jury. She's not that good. He looks at her and he's like, all right, I'm in. Cool. She's like, promise? She's like, yeah, I promise. Has no intention whatsoever of voting for Parvati.
Go straight to Parvati. So Danny's throwing out your name. And then, of course, Parvati's mad. It was a ripple effect at that point. Ethan then goes to Rob and says, she made this comment in front of Ben, and he's like, Rob's just confused at this point. He's like, what is she doing?
He's so confused about how poorly she's playing the situation. He's not confused about the information he's receiving. He's confused about why she thinks that makes sense. Right.
He's concerned for her. He's like, my little protege is not playing right.
Ideally, in this scenario, and Adam makes this comment, they would have just gone with the plan and voted out Ben and kept Danni because they want the old school, new school thing. And Adam is ecstatic at the idea of voting out Danni because that gives them one more old school person that is out of the game. Mm-hmm. And the first one that they voted out was Natalie, which is technically new school. So my point being, if Danni hadn't said anything and just had a much more casual conversation with people, there's no way she was the vote this week. It would have been Ben, or it would have been someone else. She made herself a target. She literally got herself voted out.
Yeah.
Right? There's no way that she's the name that comes up in this scenario. She hasn't played in forever.
As people do in this game, especially early on, if there's returners or if there's just mega fans, people just wait for other people to self-implode, and that's who you vote out, because why would you even want to deal with them?
Right.
Because then they become a wild card. Ben's a wild card because he is so hyper all the time. So you don't know what he's thinking because but he's not self-imploding. He's not self-destructing. He's just super excited and he brings up points that don't have an end.
Right.
Danny's self-destructing and she's bringing up worst case scenario points.
Right. It's never been more clear to me than it was in this episode. how different the caliber of some of these players are, even though they won their particular season. Kim did not come across very well at all in the first episode. She was panicky. She thought it was her. She was walking up to conversations that suddenly went quiet when she got there. Ben has not had very good moments socially. And then in this one, it's Danni, obviously. And Danni she's the third person voted out, but she's the first one to get voted out because she played the game poorly. The first two got voted out, Natalie and Amber, because of the relationships that they had in the game. Didn't have anything else to do with that. Amber could have helped herself out a little bit more, but she was always going to have a target. Natalie, same thing because of Jeremy.
Yep.
Danni's the first one that got voted out because she's bad at the game. In this particular setting, she was obviously good the first time to end up winning, but in this season, she's probably in the bottom 2 or 3 of skill level to this point in this season.
Yeah, absolutely.
So not all winners are created equal. That's never been more clear to me than in this episode. But so essentially we get to Tribal, and there's a bag check situation because Rob just says, hey, let's look for idols, right? Or let's see if anybody has an idol. And everybody's just like, okay, Rob will do whatever you want. And they dump their bag. Obviously, the point being, if you don't dump your bag, people are going to assume you have an idol. So you kind of have to. But I just thought it was interesting how they were all just so quick to be like, okay, cool, sounds good.
Yeah.
I think they came in with that plan because Parvati didn't seem surprised. Parvati was like, yeah, let's do it.
Well, this was after he whispered to Jeremy and Parvati and I think Ethan.
Okay.
And I don't think he was talking about like, oh yeah, this is who we should vote out. I think he was saying like, hey, this watch what I'm about to pull. But I will say, and I'm surprised nobody made a comment on it, Adam was very vocal about the bag dump. Ben brought up the idol situation. He was like, hey guys, I understand that I may be a threat because I'm good at looking at idols, but like I really like would prefer to help people find idols. Like I don't want idols this season. Like I dealt with that stress. I don't want it. Like I want to make friends. And that's when Rob was like, wait a second, you're helping people find idols. And then Adam, who you may remember has the identical half of Denise's idol, was like, I mean, I don't know why we're doing this, but I mean,
right.
You can check my, like
And then Rob straight up asks him and he's like, no, I don't have one.
Yeah, but he kind of did the same thing as not emptying his bag. He
right.
made a
he's
big
like,
hissy fit about the fact that, which, side note again about Adam, had to get Ben to help him put his torch in a hole because he was just sticking it into a
random crack in the ground.
Yeah.
Right.
And Jeff had to have Ben help him.
Speaking of idols, I want to go to a comment that Parvati made before they actually voted out Danni. And she basically makes the case that, I can't remember who it was right before her that spoke, but they said it was Michelle. The old school, new school thing is irrelevant to Michelle, is what she said. She's like, it doesn't matter. People are evolving. People are changing. And I think that that's the case for some people. Like, I think Ethan was definitely better in this episode than he was in the first. He seems to be getting his footing. But Parvati immediately says, no, I don't think that's the case at all. I think there's still this old school, new school divide in terms of how you play the game, because people that are truly, truly old school do not know how to deal with advantages and idols and twists that can completely change things. Which I thought was interesting because 2 of the 3 people that have been voted out to this point, being Amber and Danni, are those old school players. So if you're going based off of they're not as good at the game, they're not as much of a threat from a gameplay standpoint because they don't know how to deal with these things, why are they 2 out of the first 3 people voted out?
Yeah. Well, Danni wasn't a threat. She was just dumb.
That's my point. You want those people. So,
not
like,
at this point.
in a winner's season,
no,
you would want to get people that are good at the game out first.
You want dumb people at the merge.
Exactly. That's why you want to keep them. That's my point.
You want to keep dumb people around you at the merge to get you further. Right now, they're nowhere near the merge. They need to keep people that can actually play the game and win challenges. I don't think Danni was doing either. So what's the point?
Well, I mean, so the only argument in terms of getting rid of her is that she's just so unpredictable and a wild card that they're like, it's an easy vote. We can move one along.
Well, yeah,
but I don't
rolling around telling people about people's alliances
right.
and throwing out best friends' names and stuff like that. Like, she literally, it was somebody that there was absolutely no point in working with her now. In 5 votes, in 10 votes, in 15, like, there was no point in working with her.
My only point is, I'm not necessarily agreeing with the last 2 votes from a long-term strategy standpoint. I think that people are so terrified of getting voted out of this season, and they want to get as far as they can so badly because they view it as this like hierarchy of the best Survivor players of all time. And if you get to the merge, then you're one of the greatest players that have ever played, that they're just doing the easy vote at least for the first two, or for the last two. Natalie, again, was a relationship thing. Amber was a relationship thing. But if you're just going by how good they presumably are at the game, I would want Danni and Amber to still be in the game. The only reason I wouldn't want Amber is because of her and Rob's relationship. They're guaranteed too. But I feel like they're making the easy vote. Someone actually makes the comment during this episode and says, yeah, this is kind of the appease Michelle. It's like the appease everybody vote. It's an easy one. We can just move on. She makes that comment to Jeremy. And I feel like that's more the direction they're going rather than taking big shots. And I guess I just have an issue with that because I feel like they're just so scared. That's all.
Well, and you see time and time again that big shots go wrong. And it's way too early in the game to have a shot like that go wrong. Jeremy said it himself. He said, I'd love to make a big move, but at the time and place that we are in the game, anything can happen. Anything can go wrong. And if it goes wrong now, I'm out next. If it goes wrong in the merge, there's still so many things happening that you might not be out next. But now, when it's kind of, what are we doing now?
That hasn't necessarily been the case in the past. Like Game Changers, Tony was one of the first people out. Like big moves early in the game is much more normal now than it used to be. And again, I just think that people are holding themselves back from taking risks. Now, part of this, and this is the only other point that I wanted to make here about this week before we talk about like the preview for next week's episode, is because Red has gone to tribal twice and Rob is on that tribe. And it is very, very clear that they are terrified of him. Obviously, the pair of him and Parvati together. But the big move would be to get out one of them. And nobody wants any part of it, which you would think early on that would be one of the better times to do it. But they don't have a Sandra or a Tony on this tribe that's going to take that risk. Even though Edge is there and they can possibly get back in, they want no part of it.
Yeah.
So my point is, how would you, if you were in that situation, go about? Because I honestly think you have to have like a 3-vote process and plan to get Rob out of this game because he is now such a big part of it and so well planted within a couple of different relationships.
Ethan, Parvati, Rob.
Right. I think you have to whittle down the eyes and ears that are around him. Mm-hmm. Because if he finds out about something, he's going to be able to turn people. And then you have to start getting out those people that are closest to him.
If you want to make it a 4-person vote, it would be Ben first, then Ethan, then Parvati, then Rob, just because Rob knows he can go to Ben at any time to get information. Ethan is a little bit harder to crack, but still on Rob's side. Parvati's right-hand man, then Rob would have nobody.
Right. And you have to get it to a point where you only really need like 4 people to vote him out. Yep. Because if you get more than that, then someone's going to flake and he's going to find out and suddenly someone's being voted out 5-4. I honestly feel like, and it's crazy that you have to think about it that much to get him out, but he's honestly that good. And I don't think anybody's looked any better than he has to this point.
Well, they only have 8 people on the tribe now, so.
Right. So maybe if you can last one more, well, no, yeah, you would have to last one more and then it would be 7 against the 3 of Ethan, Rob, and Parv. That makes it very easy to say, hey, we have 4 people here right now. Parvati, Rob, and Ethan are not here. All we have to do, we know we can get Rob out. All we have to do is all 4 vote for him. Now, it's not that simple. But once you get the numbers down a little bit smaller, it's a little bit easier to make the case to a smaller group of people. So.
Yeah.
Anyway, so at that point, Danni does get voted out. She gives her token to Denise. We couldn't really come up with a rationale for that unless there's some kind of off-camera thing where they have a much better relationship than we think. Or she was just that much on the outs that she was like, I'll give it to whoever.
Well, to be fair, in this episode, we said, is Denise dumb and is Danni dumb?
That's their connection.
So, cool. I mean, to each their own. Denise now has half an idol and 2 fire tokens. So, I don't know how that happened, but...
And then moving into next week, the preview is, speaking of big moves, essentially supposed to be about that. A lot of the conversations seem to be centered around when are we going to start getting the bigger people out? Because I think they're looking at the people that are out of the game now and realizing that there's still a lot of very, very, very big fish that you probably would have expected to not last past 3 votes. I know that I personally said that I didn't think Rob, Sandra, Tony, or Amber, I don't think any of them were going to get to the merge. And not that we're all that close to the merge, but we're probably like 5 or 6 votes out at this point.
Yeah.
And, it seems more and more likely all the time that at least one of those people is going to get there. So, who knows?
I mean, what? We're at 8 and 9, so we have 17 left.
You can merge at 13.
You can. I don't think they will at a winter season, though. Or maybe they will because it would be more
They want to get
drama.
someone back in quicker, though. They get to 12, and then they bring someone
Who do you think's going home next week?
I don't know. It depends on who loses the challenge. I have no idea.
I think Sandra.
Why?
I don't know. I feel like if a tribe's going to make a big move, it's going to be Red.
You think like Tony and Sarah are going to galvanize some people?
Tony, Sarah, Tyson. I think if a tribe is going to make a big move, it's going to be Red, simply because Blue has now been to tribal twice and they're really not getting anywhere because Rob's in charge of everyone. Even when they don't want him in charge, he's just still in charge. Whereas on Red, although Sandra was able to convince people to flip and get Amber out, I still believe Tony, Sarah, Tyson, I feel like they are a little bit more strong-willed to make a move now, unlike what we've seen on Blue.
Plus, they have the we're not connected, but now we're connected alliance of like Yule and Wendell. Like they would have the numbers. It doesn't seem like Sandra has nearly as good of a hold on her group as Rob does. Now, there could be a switch next episode. There could be all kinds of things, but I would agree that...
Ooh, a tribe swap.
Right.
That would be dope.
So, and we agreed as well prior to the season that Sandra's tribe was the group that definitely had more high-value targets, like herself, like Tony, maybe even Sarah at this point, and then like
Tyson.
Amber as well, and Tyson. So I would agree that I don't know, I have any idea who's going to go home next week, but if someone was going to make a big move, I would say it would definitely be that group. You got anything else?
Nope.
Cool. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.
See ya.